This is Canada Reads American Style, featuring two friends who love Canada Reads and Canadian literature. Welcome our host Rebecca from Michigan and Tara from Ontario.
Hi, everyone. It's Rebecca. And Tara and I actually have a mystery author that we're going to be chatting with today, and we're really excited. And we have with us Jonathan Whitelaw. He is an author, award-winning journalist, and broadcaster. He writes cozy mysteries starring a mother and son-in-law detective duo set in the Lake District of the UK. The the Bingo Hall Detectives will be released in North America in January. And welcome to our show, Jonathan. We're so happy to have you.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a delight. Glad to be here.
Great, thank you. So, when you told us a little bit about your background, I was really fascinated about your journalism and your broadcaster experience. So, can you tell us a little bit about your background and then also tell us about your book?
Certainly. I've worked as a journalist non-stop, pretty much 8 days a week for the past 10 years, 9, 10 years, until I moved from the UK over to Alberta, here in Alberta. And before that, I worked in politics. Actually, I was a media advisor for an MSP in the Scottish Parliament. Before moving back to journalism, I studied psychology. I read psychology at university, and it became pretty clear towards the end of my undergraduate degree that I wasn't going to be clad in tweed and sitting around listening to everybody's problems. And the weird thing is, my wife's a psychiatrist, so I think it's read into that. You can imagine what our dinner table conversations are like. Um, but yeah, I mean, I left university. My parents are from a journalism background. I freelanced for a little bit. I got a chance to work in the Scottish Parliament, which was fantastic on the sort of um, the on the darker side of politics. And then when I left there after about 14 months, I went into journalism and pretty much haven't stopped since. It's been great. It's a wonderful job, and I'm very very lucky. I've been very lucky to be a journalist for as long as I have been in this modern era, and now obviously I'm writing full time. Yeah.
Okay, but let me just jump in and ask, are your politics in Scotland, are they better or worse than the US?
Listen. We're put it this way: we're not living in a golden age of global politics. I
Yeah.
won't get into it too deeply, but yeah, it's very very different. It's very very strange, particularly when you work in it. I mean, I worked in it between 2010 and 2012, and that was it feels like a thousand years ago now compared to everything that's happened since. Um, but I mean, I don't think anybody could have predicted. I certainly couldn't have predicted it when I left politics that the global political stage would be shaped in the way that it has been in the past sort of 10 years or so. And funnily enough, in my second novel, Hellcorp, which came out in 2018, it's about the devil solving murders, and one of the lines at the start in the first, well, sorry, I think it's the second chapter, talks about Donald Trump. Um, and this was long before there was any sort of iteration that he was not only going to run for the White House but get in. So that's what happens when you side with the dark side. I think is you start putting things out into the ether, and then lo and behold, they happen. I should start writing about the lottery, and winning
There you go.
lottery tickets, and try and see if it still works. But yeah, a very very strange decade.
Okay, so tell us about the Bingo Hall Detective specifically then.
Certainly. So the Bingo Hall Detectives, it stars Jason and Amita, who are a son-in-law and mother-in-law um, sleuthing duo running around Cumbria in the Lake District in the UK. Um, the Amita is a 70-year-old, a spry 70-year-old, a pillar of the community. She's a member of the Bingo Hall, Bingo Club, beg your pardon, and the WI, and any good cause that's happening locally. Um, she's very much a part of it, and her son-in-law Jason is an out-of-work journalist, so who's been laid off, been made redundant after the local newspaper closed down. So where we join them, the relationship's quite fractious, to say the least, and they team up when one of Amita's bingo club colleagues is found dead behind her house, and Amita suspects it might not be something as simple as a fall off a step ladder. That there might be something a little bit more sinister to it, and the pair of them set about using all their skills, all their acumen, and all of their conflict for each other to get to the bottom of the mystery. Yeah, and that's pretty much it. I hope I haven't spoiled it. I always worry when
No,
I always panic when I get asked to do a synopsis of one of my books that I end up giving something away.
no, no, you haven't.
Yeah, and that's one of the things Tara and I talked about in advance. We thought our questions to you are gonna be very sort of generic in a sense so that we don't spoil any of the story for everybody. But I will say, and Tara and I both agreed on this, we loved like the humor in the book.
Oh my
And I
gosh.
and I do love the conflict between the two main characters and the humor. Just
Yeah,
brilliant.
Lovely. That's very kind of you.
yeah.
I've always loved that. I've always been drawn to books and cinema and TV where you have two characters, particularly main characters, who don't get on, quite frankly. And it's I always love a dynamic of that sort of relationship. I grew up um, I grew up watching things like the Lethal Weapon movies, and of course that relationship between Danny Glover and Mel Gibson's characters, it mellows over the movies, but certainly in the first one, they really really don't get on. They're chalk and cheese, and I think that's always stuck with me is that I love that. I love having that sort of conflict between the two main characters, the two lead characters, and uniting them for one sort of common goal. Um, and obviously, with the mother-in-law son-in-law relationship, it's like these are two completely different people who probably wouldn't get on and probably wouldn't hang around with each other if they didn't have that mutual person in the middle, like a Venn diagram.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And a but they do and they have to because they're family and yeah, that's really where the story sort of came from was that relationship. I built everything around the two characters really.
Well, I loved the relationship between Jason and Amita, Jonathan, but I've that relationship between a man and his mother-in-law is not one that's often explored
Yeah,
in this kind of literature. Like if it is, it's the ugly side of
yeah,
it and
yeah.
not them working as a pair. So what was the inspiration?
Well, it's strange because you're right. I think the sort of generic thought and the generic place to go to when it comes to a man and his mother-in-law is one of utter conflict and endless conflict, and it's the butt of an awful lot of jokes.
Mhm.
You've got comedians who've made whole careers out of making mother-in-law jokes, haven't you? Um, Usually not very funny ones as it happens, but yeah, I think yeah, I think I, I've always been fascinated um, by almost fate and fate throwing people together and finding yourself in a position where had it not been I'm not a great philosopher, as you could probably tell. I'm not a great philosopher. um but I love that life in general tends to throw people together who might necessarily never have met through any other circumstance other
Mhm.
than, for example, marriage.
Yeah.
um and I've been saying since the book came out, 6 months ago it came out in April in the UK 6 months ago, and it's obviously, as we mentioned, it's out in the new year. Um, and I've been saying all that time that it's absolutely not based on the relationship that I've got with my mother-in-law. Because, quite frankly, if my mother-in-law and I teamed up to solve a murder, there would be two more murders, namely ours and the murdering each other. So we won't be doing that anytime soon. The book is dedicated to my mother-in-law, though. I dedicated it to her because I wanted to mostly, um, I couldn't. I don't think I could get away with not writing about a mother-in-law not dedicated to my own one.
Yeah,
So
I
she was
agree.
delighted. She was delighted when she found that out. Yeah.
So you earned points with that.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely that. I mean, that's the thing. I've known. My wife and I have been together 10 years. We've been married 4. Um. So we've got a very very good relationship. My mother-in-law and I. She's coming
Good.
out, actually. She's coming out to Canada. She stays in Northern Ireland. She's from Northern Ireland. So she's very, very different to Amita in terms of,
Yeah.
like, geography and stuff. Although oddly, funnily enough, she's second generation immigrant from India. She grew up in Sheffield in the UK before moving north to Penrith, where the book's set. And I got it was a review, I think, not long after the book came out in the UK, who said, the reviewer said that she actually thought Amita was very Irish sounding. And of course,
Oh,
that wasn't my intention, because they're very geographically different and socially different, the
Yeah.
places that they happen. But of course, my real life mother-in-law is Northern Irish, so I thought that was probably pretty telling about my subconscious.
Yeah.
wow, that's interesting.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It was, yeah, I hadn't. I mean, again, I hadn't. It wasn't like I didn't go out of my way to not model it, to not model Amita on my mother-in-law. Um, but I guess it's one of these things that sometimes these things will just invariably come out in your writing
Yeah.
when you least expect it. There is one part of the book that is based on my mother-in-law, um, and it's the nickname. It's Amita's nickname. So her nickname in the book is the Sheriff of Penrith. Um, because she's involved in everything, and Jason used it in a semi derogatory, semi affectionate manner. And my wife and I call my mother-in-law the Sheriff of Mary. So she's from a village called Mary, a very, very small fishing village called Mary. And I thought, you know what, that's a fantastic title. I love that. I'm going to use that. So
Yeah.
she was probably paid her £25 in copyright fees, and asked never to mention it again.
That's brilliant.
Sorry, I'm going to ask a little bit about your process too before we move on, Jonathan. So when you started the book, no, we're not going to put any spoilers out there,
Certainly.
but did you know who the murderer was when you started writing the book and then worked that way? Or do you work the other way? Did you start the book not knowing and work towards the murderer? Do you know what I mean?
It's Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's interesting, actually, because whenever I start a book, whenever I start a project, what I'll do is, mostly for my own head, to make sure that I know and tend to follow what's going on. I'll usually write a 2-page synopsis of the whole book.
Okay.
So sort of key moments, little clues as to what's going to lead up
Yeah.
to the reveal and stuff like that, and maybe red herrings as well.
Yeah.
And usually what happens is, if I'm on contract, then I'll send that to my agent, and then that goes to the publisher to make sure that they're obviously happy with it. But I use that as a guide when I sit down to write it. Now, usually what happens is, I mean, it'll be a 2-page, maybe 500 words tops. So there's a lot of gap in between getting to those key points, and I never ever map those out, because I always find that I work a lot better as a writer when those things just sort of happen organically. I know a lot of writers who will map everything out on spreadsheets and on um, various programs, and it's
Yeah.
every little they've pretty much written the book already
Okay.
across different programs before they actually sit down to write it, in Google Docs or what have you. But I don't work that way. As long as I've got it mapped out um, in terms of how we start, the middle, the red herrings, the clues, and all the rest of it, then I just let everything else between there come out as I write it. Um, Interestingly, for this book, again, without doing any spoilers, I actually changed a fairly major element of the role of the killer,
Oh,
when I sat down to write it. So it was a very, very different. It was a very, very different setup, when I first planned it out. And I got to the sort of, the sort of last quarter, last third of the novel when I was writing, because I write it sequentially.
yeah.
Um, and I thought, actually, do you know what? This might work a bit better. Um,
Very
so
cool.
so I did it. And I panicked. I thought, oh my god, I've already said to I've already said to the publisher that this isn't the case. But then I thought to myself, well, you know, if they don't like it, then they can come back to me and tell me, and I can always change it. But
Yeah.
this has just come to me. This little idea has just come to me. Why don't I change it to this, and then we'll see how we go. And they loved it. They thought it was great. They thought it made it better.
Yeah.
And that's that. So that, you know, what you read now is the changed role of it. There was a little bit of rewriting I had to do just in terms of the logistics of it. Again, without going into too many spoilers or anything. But I was and I've never done that before. That's never ever happened before when I've been writing writing novels. I've never ever been in that position where I thought, oh, could I change this sort of 3/4 of
Yeah.
the way through the book? I'm glad I did though. I'm really glad I
Yeah.
did. But I think that's the, you know, that's kind of the journalist in me. It's particularly being an online journalist, is that, you know, you've got to be flexible. You've got to be you've got to be able to go with the flow. You've got to be willing to change these things if you think it's going to be for the better. So I was grateful. I was grateful for all that training that I'd got as a journalist, to be able to have the courage to go ahead and do something like this, because,
Hmm.
you know, I could have spent weeks, months debating whether to do it and end up not doing it. And I think it was for the better. But
Yeah.
I would say that I wrote it.
Well, when we're offline, you're gonna have to tell Tara and me
Yeah.
about that, 'cause
Absolutely,
we definitely wanna know how you changed
Yeah.
that, so but
absolutely.
but but the readers will just have to read your book and then ask us later, so we'll fill them in.
It's a
Well,
deal.
yeah, and Jonathan, I have to ask this because I was fascinated by the chapter titles, and I because I often don't I sort of forget to read chapter titles, but then I went back and I went, "Wait a minute," and then I started reading them and I thought, "Wait a minute, they have nothing to do with the story, like, I don't get it," and so I Google searched it,
Yep.
and so I wondered if you've had any feedback, from your non-British readers, but now that I think about it, I don't is it only out in the UK? And then yeah, so have you did you have reaction about that, or is that a something that everybody in the UK knows? And follow-up question, are you a bingo player?
So I'll be honest with you. I'll be honest with you guys. It surprised me how many people have picked up on it. Both from exactly, you know, your perspective, going, I didn't get that, or actually,
Mhm.
do you know what, that's what it is. I don't think we're spoiling it if we say that
Yeah.
the titles of the chapters are named after the calls for the numbers
Hmm.
in bingo. So, for example, the first chapter is called Kelly's Eye, which is for number one. You've got things like Two Little Ducks, which is 22, I think. Now, I in a very, very sort of segue into your second question, I am not an avid bingo player. However, my grandmother was,
Yeah.
to the point probably of addiction, actually. And she used to take my brother and I to bingo if we were staying over with her on like a Thursday or Friday night or something during the school holidays. And we would go down there, and she would, I mean, like, you know, my grand, bless her, she's gone now. She's been, she passed away about a decade ago, I think. Um, but I mean, any game of bingo that was going, she would be there, you know. And that's the thing. It's now it's mega money. You know,
Oh,
you
yeah.
can go to
Yeah.
these things and be winning jackpots of millions and millions of dollars, millions of pounds. But my grand, bless her, she used to sit and play games for, you know, under £5. She would play any game of bingo. She just loved it. She loved it so much.
Yeah.
Um, and I've got fond memories of being at the bingo with her, and I've got not so fond memories of being at the bingo with her, because that was the thing back then.
Yeah.
It was the 90s when I was growing up, and they didn't have the smoking ban in the UK,
Yep.
Yep.
so, or indeed anywhere. So you used to, like, the one that she used to take us to was a little club that was at the base of her sort of retirement block. Um, and you would open up the door, and I kid you not, the wall of smoke would hit you,
Mhm.
and you wouldn't be able to see across the room because the smoke was so thick. And she would happily take, you know, me being whatever, 10 years old, my brother being 3 years old, 4 years old,
Yeah.
and we would sit there. But then again, you didn't. That was the thing. You didn't know any better back then. You know,
Yeah.
it was
Yeah.
a very, very different time. But yeah. I mean, the bingo title chapters. That was an idea from my wonderful editor Jen,
Yeah.
who's fantastic, and she thought, why don't we title the chapters after the bingo calls.
And when I Google searched them, I read them all because I was fascinated
Yeah,
because in the US, they just say B14. They don't
yeah.
give you
Hmm.
they just do it in such a boring way, and I thought, "I love this British way that they do it." And I just wanna say I also grew up going to bingo with my Hungarian grandmother, who was also pretty addicted with
Yeah.
my mother, and the same thing with the smoke. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
totally understand what you're talking about.
Absolutely that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't fond. Like I said, fond memories and not so fond memories. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Don't think it helped my asthma any, but you know what? I got to spend time with my gran and my brother. So it's every cloud, as they say.
I will join the club. I grew up in Newfoundland in the 70s, and I had the same experience with
Yeah,
my grandmother. And it was
yeah,
the same one that was on the Saturday night bingo was at
yep.
I think it was one of the theaters on Broadway, and you opened up the doors and it just billowed
Oh
out.
yeah, yeah. I mean
Yeah.
that was the
Yeah.
thing. Like the little club room that they had where my gran played, they had windows that looked out onto a corridor because it was within the main building. And I mean, you know, I don't think those windows had ever been cleaned. They were thick with tar. You know, you could have repaved your driveway with the tar that you scraped off of those things. But yeah, it was it turned out to be an education as we've
Yeah.
you know, had it not happened, I probably wouldn't be sitting here chatting to you guys now. So there you go.
There you go.
It's fate. It's fate. There you are.
Okay, so I loved Jason and Amita and the bingo hall group.
Yep.
Amita's friends were also
Mhm.
amazing. I cannot remember the character. There's a deaf character,
Oh,
right?
Ethel.
Ethel.
Oh, yeah.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, I
Ethel's the
loved
oldest.
Ethel so much. As soon as she appeared on the page, I could not stop laughing every time. I loved Ethel.
Yeah.
So, will we see more of Jason and Amita and the bingo hall group in the future?
Well, for at least one more book,
Excellent.
Oh,
which is out
good.
in the which is out in April in the UK in April. I don't have
Okay.
a North America release date for that one at the moment, but as soon as I do, I will let you know. So
Excellent.
I've written the first draft of it. It's with my publisher. I'm just waiting on the edits coming back. Um, and it's it's been an experience. It's been quite. I'll be honest. It's been the hardest thing that I've ever written because
Oh,
Mhm.
I firmly believe that the Bingo Hall Detectives is the absolute best thing I've ever written, and as is always the case within the book industry, within publishing, is that write the best thing you've ever written, and then a year later you've got to go and do it again.
yeah.
Not only
Mhm.
again, but do it better. Funnily enough, I was back in the UK for the Bloody Scotland Festival in Stirling.
Mhm.
It was the middle of September, and my publisher was there. She came up. Jen came up. My editor's Jen, who's also the publishing director of Harper North, which is the imprint at HarperCollins that the book's out with. And we were talking about it, and I said this to her. And I said that it's the hardest thing I've had to write because I'm so proud of the Bingo Hall Detectives
Mhm.
as a sort of career landmark. And a lot of that is to do with the collaboration that I've had with her, with the publisher. And I said to her, I was just perfectly honest. And I've said this to everyone. I'll tell you guys as well. It's like a lot of it is wanting to repay the faith that the publisher has shown in
Mhm.
me as a writer. You know, to let me to give me the confidence to go out and do something like this and come up with these characters and do horrible things to them and do
Mm.
not so horrible things to them. And I said that to her. I said, look, you know, it's been a pressure that I felt that I wasn't quite expecting. And don't get me wrong, it's a really lovely problem to have, you know,
Yeah.
and acutely aware we're talking about politics and things like that. Acutely aware that the world is full of actual problems and real problems. But I was just honest, and I've been honest with everyone that I'm so proud of the Bingo Hall Detectives, remain so proud of it.
Mhm.
That I just wanted to do a really good job with those characters with a brand new story. So it's written. The first
Awesome.
draft's written. I'm just waiting on the edits coming back, and it'll be ready for April.
That's great. That's great news. I look
Thank you.
forward to it.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, same here. Because I love the characters too. Many of the characters especially Ethel was
Oh
hilarious,
gosh,
and
she's so
even
funny.
the I can't think of again her name, but the snarky one, that
Oh
one, she
yeah.
just
Oh,
really
Georgie Littlejohn. Yeah,
yes.
Yes.
she. I think I can't remember if it made it into the book, but there's a line that I wrote certainly, and it really got my head around that character. Was that Georgie Littlejohn is the type of woman that you have to say both her names. You know, she's that type of person who insists on being named fully. You know, if you don't call her Georgie Littlejohn, it'll be Mrs. Littlejohn. You know, that's the yeah. So they're all back. They're all back.
Excellent.
They're all back in the new one. So
Great.
it's been good fun.
Well, you just referenced the conference that you were at, the Bloody Scotland, and I wanted you to talk about that because interestingly, my favorite mystery writer, Sarah Paretsky, did a virtual
Yes,
presentation there. And I didn't see it, but I love her and I was excited to see her part of that. So can you talk about it? Because it sounded like a fantastic conference.
certainly. It was the 10th anniversary this year. I've been lucky to be a part of it for the last 4 years. Um, and I also do Bloody Scotland. It's a charity, and it's based in Stirling, which is right in the centre of Scotland. They do usually it's sort of 3 days over the sort of middle of September, a weekend in the middle of September. 4 days this year, just because it was the 10th anniversary. And it's very, 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 very well attended, both online and in real life, um, and very, very highly thought of by crime and mystery writers across the world. Actually, they've had some incredible guests over the years. Um, Sarah Paretsky, as you mentioned, Stephen King was at it last year. Um,
Wow.
we had who else has there been? We had Jeffrey Archer was at it this year. Ian Rankin, obviously, everyone knows Ian
Mhm.
Rankin. He's a sort of regular. Val McDermott, she wasn't there this year, but very much celebrated. And it's always really really good fun. The way that it's very very laid back. It's a very very laid back festival, and it's across sort of three venues in Stirling. And Stirling isn't all that big a city, um, and it always feels like a bit of a reunion for people when they go. And it's also at that time of the year as well. It's sort of September. It always kind of feels like you're going back to college.
Mhm.
It's got that
Hmm.
kind of feel that you've not seen people since the end of term, and you go back and you meet them. It's so yeah. I've been lucky to be a part of it. Whether it's been hosting panels, or I was a guest on a panel this year as well as hosting. Um, and they do a monthly book club as well, which runs on Facebook. Um, in fact, it was today. The September one was today, and it was really really good. And I'm privileged to be a part of that as well. So yeah, it's really really nice to be a part of it as much as I am, because I sort of straddle it as both an author and as a media person, because they always ask me to host something, which I love doing.
Yeah.
But it was really really nice to be asked to be a panelist this year, just on the back of obviously the Bingo Hall Detectives coming out. And it was funnily enough, um, it was really really weird, because I had to keep biting my tongue while I was on stage, because I had this tendency to I kept trying to revert back to host mode by going, all right, oh, I think someone wants to ask a question there, or well, what do you think of this? And forgetting that I wasn't the host. So I spent the sort of 40, 50 minutes there sweating buckets, sweating bullets, making sure that I didn't say anything out of turn. Whereas when I'm the host, I can see what I like. It's great fun. But yeah, it's fantastic. I would encourage everyone to do it. Like I said, they do a sort of hybrid model of it now, where you get a lot of online only events, which are always fantastic, and you can catch up with it and stuff. And the numbers for the festival just grow and grow and grow, and they have done for the last couple of years, which is lovely to see. I mean, it's the same with most book festivals. I think everywhere, everyone sort of struggled after the pandemic and all the lockdowns and things like that, and it's just really really nice to be able to get back meeting people to talk about books. That's essentially what it comes down to.
Okay, can I ask, since you mentioned her name, Val McDermid, she is like she and Sarah Presky are my two top favorites. Have
Right.
you ever met her? Because I just think she's incredible.
I
Like,
have. I have.
oh,
I've had the
tell me
privilege.
something about her. Oh my gosh.
Um, what can I tell you about Val that she won't want my guts for garters? Val McDermott is probably one of the most intelligent people I think I've ever met in my life, and
Wow.
she's so clever that you feel more intelligent just being in the same room as her. But I actually always think that she's so approachable. She's really really approachable, and I really really hope she doesn't take offense to this. But I find her to be very very grandmotherly.
Hmm.
And that's I'm not having yeah it's not an age thing. I'm not saying that, but
Yeah.
she does have this really really welcoming manner about her.
Yeah.
And I mean, to be honest, like that's the thing. Like particularly someone at Bloody Scotland and these sorts of festivals, you realise that writers are just other human beings. They're just exactly the same. They'll go to the bar the same way that anybody else. I always find it absolutely hey, remarkable. like after events, invariably you guys will know this, you'll get like a signing session with the author, and I'll sit there on the signing side of the table, and people will come up with copies of my books, and they're really, really embarrassed. They're like really bashful and sheepish, going, "Oh, would you mind signing this for me, please, Mr. Whitelaw?" And I'm like, first and foremost, I'm not Mr. Whitelaw, and secondly, it's me who should be sheepish and bashful to you guys, because you've put you're putting food on my table by buying one of my books, which means I get paid. So like, it's always, if anybody's listening to this and they ever think that, oh God, I really don't want to go up to do a signing session, please do it, because that's the thing. We writers absolutely love to talk about books, anybody's books, not just their own, but anybody and everybody's books, and we love to share that kind of reading, because that's the thing. All good writers, all writers, good and bad, we're all readers, we're all avid readers. We devour literature of any kind. So come and talk to us. It's always good fun.
But it's funny because I'm one of those people that get completely starstruck. So that's why I know, really, I do. And I am one of those that have a hard time approaching someone. And so, yeah. So it's nice to hear that from you, but it still makes me.
I dread to think, I would always dread to think that someone was terrified to come up and speak to me about my books. I would think, what have I done wrong?
Oh,
And
okay.
it's not a, that's me, that's me assuming that anybody wants to come up and talk to me about my books right enough, which is maybe pretty arrogant of me. But yeah, that's the thing. Yeah, I've been lucky enough to have a real go at this as a professional career. And if anybody wants to come up and chat, come up and do it. And I would encourage everybody to go and do that, to any author, to every author. And if you find that you have a bad experience with it, then, well, to be honest with you, they don't deserve to have your company and your presence.
Mm.
It's as simple as that.
Thank you. Okay. I'm going to remember that. Thank you.
So, Jonathan, before you leave us, we would love it if you read a little bit from your book as like a little teaser.
Absolutely, I certainly would. I just so happen to have a copy in front of me, which is very, very helpful. I'll read from the first chapter, if that's okay with you guys. Are you all right with
Yeah.
that? Lovely. Okie doke. Right. So, first chapter. Uh, Hopefully, there's no other baggage that you have to take with it, and this is just a little flavour of the relationship between Jason and Amita. So, chapter 1, Kelly's Eye. "We're not Starsky and Hutch. Would you please slow down?" Jason gritted his teeth. His mother-in-law was a notorious backseat driver. Too fast, too slow, too close to the curb. "Watch out for that cyclist. Wasn't that the turning there? Are we there yet?" She had mentioned them all. It should have been a scenic drive through the lakes to the peaceful town of Penrith, not the Cannonball Run. His grip on the steering wheel tightened. "I'm going at the limit, Amita," he said, trying to keep his voice light. "I don't care what that thing says. You're going too fast," she fired back. "I'd like to be able to see my grandchildren at least one more time, if that's all right with you. Which reminds me, do you drive like a maniac with them in the car and I'm not here? Does your wife know about your lead foot?" "I know where I'd like to put my lead foot," he muttered. "What?" "Nothing," he sighed. Silence descended in the car. Jason had been spending a lot of time with his mother-in-law recently, and it wasn't through choice. It wasn't that he disliked her. Amita Khatri could be a very warm and generous woman when she chose to be. It was when she chose not to be that he had a problem. With everything that had been going on, he had enough problems to worry about. "Bugger, did I bring my glasses?" she said, reaching for her handbag. "They're on your head," said Jason, concentrating on the road. "So they are," she tutted. "Rats, have I brought my pen?" "Front pocket of your bag." "Yes, so it is," she said, finding her bingo blotter. "Now, I can't remember if I have the money to pay Georgie for that magazine subscription. You've a rolled up tenner and put it in the pocket of your cardigan." Amita patted her tummy where the pocket was. She cocked an eyebrow at Jason. "Anyone would think you were spying on me." He thought about answering her back. He thought about saying how she'd spent the last hour before leaving the house going through a very vocal checklist, as if she was packing for an attempt on Everest rather than an evening at the Penrith Bingo Club. He thought about telling her that he'd missed most of the news and all of the weather because of the racket she'd been making. Jason thought about lots of things before deciding it wasn't worth it. "Just looking out for my favourite mother-in-law," he said with forced chirpiness. "And if I believe that, I'll believe anything," she snorted, a hint of a smile behind her frown.
Thank you for sharing that with us too, Jonathan. I loved hearing it being read in your voice.
I loved it. It was such a wonderful opening because you immediately get that relationship. You just feel that, and it's funny, and it's there, but it's contentious, but it's loving, and I loved it.
It was something that I really wanted to hit the ground running with, and as we've chatted before, yeah, the story is about the stories about the relationship between those two, and everything else sort of hangs on that. And I really, really wanted the opening chapter um, to reflect that, and hopefully, hopefully that's what happened. And yeah, I'm delighted with it.
Yeah, I really, really enjoyed it, and, I'm so glad that we connected with you, and Jonathan, thank you so much, and, when the second book comes out next year or when it's available to all of us here in the United States and Canada, we would love to have you back.
A pleasure. I'd love to be back. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for joining us on our bookish journey. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing, rating, and reviewing Canada Reads American Style wherever you listen. You can connect with the podcast and Rebecca on Instagram at Canada Reads American Style and with Tara at On a Branch Reads. Until next time, keep reading.